Do you think Tel Aviv's power grid is charged purely by the sheer kinetic energy of Judah Maccabee spinning in his grave? Hi, my name's Sally, and I've wanted to do a fun little Hanukkah video for a really long time. Ever since the Leagues of Votan release, actually, I've wanted to do a Hanukkah video about the history of fantasy dwarves as an allegory for Jewish people. And finally, I said, hey, you know what? 2023, that's gonna be the year I do it. I'm gonna do it in 2023. Then, on October 7th, Hamas launched a series of attacks on Israeli settlements just outside the Gaza Strip. Attacks that the Israeli government knew about well over a year in advance and allowed to happen anyway, because they knew they would be able to use it as casus belli for, well, what they're doing right now. In the 2 months since that event took place, the IDF has been systematically turning the Gaza Strip into a crater. They've been intentionally targeting hospitals, mosques, residential centers, things that have no military value, but are things you need to destroy if your long-term goal is ethnic cleansing. There's no other word for it. This is genocide. There's no other way to describe it. And now it's Hanukkah. And Judah Maccabee is spinning in his grave. Imagery associated with the Festival of Lights, like the menorah, have become inextricably linked with the state of Israel. If you want to buy Hanukkah decorations, they are almost always going to be in white and blue. I live in a Jewish neighborhood, actually, and in my part of town, the city actually does a different light display. Normally, they do a regular Christmas light display with, like, Christmas trees and stuff, but in my neck of the woods, they do a specific Hanukkah-themed light display. The lights they put up are white and blue Stars of David. The colors white and blue hold no other significance to the Jewish community other than the fact that they're the colors of the Israeli flag. This association of Hanukkah with the state of Israel is an appalling affront to the history of the holiday and what it represents, and someone needs to talk about this. So I guess that someone is going to be me. So, fuck it. I'm just gonna bury the lead of this entire video and say it outright. Israel is a genocidal, settler colonial state that wraps its genocidal belief system in the symbols of the Jewish religion in order to hide the fact that they are, in fact, sock puppets of Western imperial interests in the Middle East. Nothing about their culture or belief system is at all notably Jewish. Here's a picture of some IDF soldiers using a knife as a fucking yod while reading the Torah, and I think that should tell you all you need to know. We don't have time for this. If you want a video talking more in depth about the historical, theological, and philosophical ways in which the state of Israel contradicts every tenet of what it means to be Jewish, let me know. But right now, I want to focus on an example more closely related to the holiday of Hanukkah, because I want to debunk this idea that Israel's nationalist narrative has any sort of meaningful connection to the history behind this holiday. And to do so, we're going to be talking about the Maccabean Revolt and the legacy of Jewish partisan movements. Right. So, the year is 168 BC. About 20 years ago, the Seleucid Empire annexed large parts of Egypt, including the province of Judea, where the holy city of Jerusalem is located. The Seleucid Empire was a Hellenistic society, a Greek successor state that still worshipped the Greek pantheon. Throughout the rule of the Seleucid Empire, as well as the rule of the Greek-speaking Ptolemaic Egyptian dynasty, more elements of Greek culture had been introduced to Judea through trade routes as well as direct conquest. This escalated in 168 BC when King Antiochus Epiphanes, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Hold on, let me Google it. Hold on. I'll be right back. I'm gonna Google it. I'm gonna Google how to pronounce this guy's fucking name. Mid-recording. I'm keeping this in the video. Mid-recording. Let's see. How do I pronounce this guy's name? Okay. Okay, I got it. It's okay. This escalated in 168 BC when King Antiochus Epiphanes decreed that the practice of the Jewish faith be outlawed and that idolatrous symbols of Greek gods be erected throughout the Judean countryside and inside synagogues. This sparked the Maccabean Revolt, first led by Mattathias Maccabee, with Judah Maccabee taking charge soon after the revolt started gaining momentum. The goal of the Maccabean Revolt was simple: expel the Seleucids from Jerusalem, protect the rights of Jews to remain religiously autonomous, and on a long enough time span, secure independence for the entire province of Judea. The story of Hanukkah in particular is focused on the rededication of the Second Temple, a critical turning point in the revolt's immediate goals of expelling the Seleucid armies from the Holy City. During the events of King Antiochus's crackdown on the Jewish faith, the Second Temple in Jerusalem was turned into a Hellenistic temple, with a pig being sacrificed inside of it. The recapturing and rededication of the Second Temple would be both a rallying symbolic victory that would bring more of Judea's Jewish population to the Maccabean cause, but would also serve as a key strategic victory. Because I don't know if you've seen the Second Temple, but it's a goddamn fortress. Against all odds, Maccabee's band of Jewish sword and sandal resistance fighters were able to retake the temple and removed the idolatrous symbols of Greek gods, rededicating the temple to the Jewish faith. Legend has it then that they only had enough oil to light the menorah for one day, but that single day's worth of oil somehow lasted 8. And now we celebrate the rededication of the Second Temple as Chanukah, the Festival of Lights. So most of that last part is almost certainly not true. We don't know exactly how this played out, as much like with a lot of ancient history, all of this was written down decades after the fact from people who knew the story through oral history. So we don't know precisely what happens. I imagine that the idea of, or the candle oil rather, that lasted for 8 days may be a mythologized allegory of some kind of Seleucid counteroffensive. Maybe after Judah Maccabee retook the Second Temple, the Seleucids put the temple back to siege in the other direction, and the siege lasted for 8 days. I don't know. Maybe. I have no way of proving that. That is entirely speculation and conjecture. But I have a feeling the exact story that is listed in the Book of Maccabees isn't necessarily true. But what we do know is that the reclamation of the temple signaled the turning of the tide, and the expulsion of the Seleucids from Jerusalem happened soon after. The Maccabean revolt would continue for many years afterwards, with Judah Maccabee himself dying in battle against the Seleucids somewhere else in the Judean countryside. His dream of an independent Judea would ultimately die with him, as the Seleucid Empire got conquered by the Armenians, only for the Armenians to get shanghaied by the Romans about 100 years after the start of the Maccabean revolt. Under Roman occupation, the religious autonomy of Jews once again came under threat, leading to the Jewish-Roman Wars in 66 AD. This next generation of Jewish revolutionaries used the menorah as a symbol of Jewish resistance against colonial oppression. The Jewish-Roman Wars would not be the last time the Jews took up arms against oppressors. And to tell the story of other Jewish partisan movements, we need to look not towards the Levant, but towards the diaspora and the 20th century.
No one wrote a blues about Leon Trotsky. No one made a statue of his head.
See, you can tell I'm a real video essayist now, because I have outfit changes. That's the same thing as good writing, right? Right, so it's 1917, and Russia is, for lack of a better term, going through it. Vladimir Lenin is currently living in exile in Finland. He's a Gentile, but he's important to telling our story. By 1917, Russia was being ruled by a provisional government after the quick, bloody, and disastrous February Revolution. Russian workers, driven to desperation by food shortages caused by Russia's involvement in World War II, were driven to engage in open street brawls with Russian forces garrisoning the home front. And it was a disaster. Riots across Russia, but especially in, the two actually important cities in Russia, Moscow and St. Petersburg, at this point known as Petrograd, because St. Petersburg sounded too German. Fun fact, that's going to be relevant later. Ended in the government's ability to maintain control of the country to basically be non-existent. In response, a number of elected legislators formed a provisional government, and Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate the throne, functionally ending the Russian Empire. However, the provisional government's Minister of War, Alexander Kerensky, still continued Russia's campaign through World War I, which took the already massively destructive food shortage problem and exasperated it further. So, Germany utilized its ace in the hole. The, at the time, disgraced socialist revolutionary living in exile, Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was critical of Russia's involvement in World War I from the very start, and Germany believed that if they could essentially deploy Lenin into the country, that he could hinder Russia's war effort further by organizing a grassroots anti-war movement. They would be more correct than they ever bargained for. Vladimir Lenin was allowed by the German government to leave his exile and return to Russia via train car. That train car was full of 19 other members of Lenin's Bolshevik party. Of those 19, half of them were Jewish. They were also not the only Jews to take part in the Russian revolutions. Leon Trotsky, a Jewish communist and academic, was a prominent member of the Mensheviks party. The Mensheviks were a breakaway movement from Lenin's Bolsheviks, who focused more on reformist electoral politics instead of violent revolutionary politics. However, by the time Leon Trotsky returned to Russia after the February Revolution, it seemed that he fully supported the Bolshevik notion of a violent armed revolt. Despite past grudges between him and Lenin, Leon Trotsky became a very prominent member of the Bolshevik Party before the October Revolution, and was positioned as the chairman of the communist forces in St. Petersburg, also known at the time as Petrograd. By the end of the October Revolution, Lenin was in control of a Marxist Russian government, and at his right hand was a man who described himself as a representative of the Jewish proletariat. He certainly wasn't a representative of the anarchist proletariat, because then in the Russian Civil War, Leon Trotsky killed just so many anarchists. He and the Bolshevik Party in general really didn't like anarchism or anarchists, despite the fact that at every stage of the Russian revolutions, the Bolsheviks simply would not have succeeded if it were not for the collaborative political actions of local anarchist movements. And when they were suddenly politically inconvenient to keep around, they were disposed of. Trotsky deserves to be in this video because of his importance to the history of Jewish revolutionaries, but I don't want that to be mistaken for a blanket endorsement of everything he did. And the anarchists he so mercilessly disposed of should be remembered for their bravery and valor in fighting against all forms of oppression, whether it be the imperialist oppression of the Tsar, the capitalist oppression of the provisional government, or the oligarchical oppression of the post-revolutionary Bolshevik state. This would also not be the only time Jews played a major role within a partisan movement on continental Europe in the 20th century. Cut to 12 years after the formation of the USSR in 1918, and continental Europe had become an incredibly safe place to be, well, a lot of different kinds of people. The 1930s was the beginning of the Holocaust, and the largest and most concentrated project within the Holocaust was the Shoah, the specific targeted destruction of Judaism on continental Europe. Though I say that not to minimize the suffering of queer, non-white, or ethnically non-European Gentiles who were just as much victims of the Holocaust. That being said, I think it's no surprise that Jews made up a large percentage of resistance movements across Europe during World War II. In 1939, Jewish Solidarity, a Belgium-based resistance movement, was formed, and later, in 1940, the French resistance began in earnest. Despite Jews only making up 1% of the French population, almost 20% of all French resistance forces were Jewish. In 1941, the Nazis invaded Greece, and Salonika and Athens, the two cities with the largest Jewish populations, became the biggest hotbeds of resistance activity in the region. Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, France, Italy, Lithuania, Greece, Yugoslavia. Anywhere the Nazis went, they immediately suffered at the hands of Jewish partisans fighting with the wrath and fury of the ancient Maccabeans. Mir wollen sie überleben took on a much more literal meaning in such cases. The partisan movements that sprung up across all of Europe, always having an outsized Jewish population relative to the local Jewish population of the region, were vital in the downfall of Nazi Germany. In Yugoslavia, partisan resistance movements completely routed several attempts by the Nazi Party to invade and occupy the country. Yugoslavia's Unitary National Liberation Front, led by the Communist Party of Yugoslavia, is widely regarded as the single most successful partisan movement across all of Europe during the Second World War. Among the Yugoslav partisans were 3,000 Jewish soldiers. Among them, 1,300 were dead by the end of the war. These are the people that Hanukkah is about. Hanukkah is a time to celebrate and remember the brave acts of Jewish partisans who have fought and died for the cause of Jewish freedom, both in the diaspora and in the Levant. It's not a time to celebrate the genocidal deeds of a settler colonial state who used this history to justify the senseless slaughter of Muslim children.
I'm a Jewish guy. Everybody hates my people. I wish I knew the reason why. I probably deserve it somehow. The number I wish to call.
The Maccabean Revolt was an uprising from a religious minority which would set the stage for a long history of Jewish partisan movements. The menorah, which became a symbol of Jewish resistance because of the Maccabean Revolt, is now a symbol more closely associated with the genocidal settler colonial state of Israel, which now perpetuates even greater atrocities against Palestinians than the Seleucids were ever able to do against the Jews in the 2nd century BC. Simply put, the two cases are not at all comparable. Resistance movements have to be resisting something. Palestinian children who are pulling corpses from the rubble are not meaningfully imposing any kind of oppression upon Israelis celebrating Hanukkah behind the fucking Iron Dome. Thankfully, the legacy of the Maccabean Revolt stretches far outside the Levant. Between the Roman-Jewish wars, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the resistance movements that sprung up in response to Nazism, it's safe to say that Judah Maccabee's spirit of Jewish defiance lives on. To be Jewish is to carry on a legacy of daring revolutionaries, to be a truly global immigrant population. We are the International. Zionism broadly as an ideology, and the State of Israel in specific, spits upon that legacy. One of the greatest things about Jewish history and about Jewish culture is that we have spent millennia being dragged through the mud by the Babylonians, then the Egyptians, then the Seleucids, then the Romans, then the Russians, and then the Germans. And there's a lot of people I left out of that list. And throughout all of it, the Jews of the diaspora have maintained a humanity, a love of life and of learning and culture. Everywhere we go, we incorporate elements of local culture into our own rituals and practices. That is the true meaning of Tikkun Olam. And now, really for the last 75 years, a fascistic, genocidal, settler colonial state is using the aesthetic cliches of our history and our culture to justify their own horrific history of atrocities and oppression. I think the image I showed earlier of the IDF soldier using a fucking knife as a yod is actually a perfect representation of the state of Israel. It takes the aesthetic of Jewish culture and twists it into something gross and violent, blasphemous and profane. If you're a Jew and you support the actions of the state of Israel and you're celebrating Hanukkah right now, I want to state it in plain English. Our ancestors are fucking ashamed of you. I'm unspeakably proud that I come from a legacy that created such men as Judah Maccabee. And I can't think of anything more disgusting and revolting than the idea of a yutz like Benjamin Netanyahu spitting upon that legacy. Happy fucking Hanukkah.
Jiddisch gar nicht, Arabisch gar nicht, Hebräisch, Russisch gar nicht, Ladino, Englisch gar nicht, Esperanto über alles. Esperanto über alles, gar nicht. Israel nothing, Palestine nothing, Theodore Herzl nothing, Yitzhak Rabin nothing, Hamas, Fatah, Hezbollah.
Ooh, I almost fell over. Ooh.